Imagine walking into the throne room of an absolute dictator. I mean, this is a guy who commands a fiercely loyal military. He controls all the wealth, the vital water supplies, and under his legal code, he literally owns your entire ethnic group as a slave labor force.
Yeah, that is a terrifying scenario.
Right. And your mission is to stand in front of this man and dismantle his empire to his face. And typically, we think you'd need, like, a magic trick, a glowing aura to paralyze the guards or something supernatural.
Exactly, the classic Sunday school version.
But what if you don't? What if what you actually need is a flawless, mathematically precise takedown of his entire macroeconomic and political system? Welcome to the deep dive.
It's just a completely different way to look at a story most people think they already know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we are so used to the passive, sanitized version of historical and religious narratives.
Yeah, we want the heroes to be, like, entirely reliant on miracles.
Right? Walking in with no strategy, just waiting for the sky to open up and solve the problem for them. But the source material we are unpacking today violently rejects that entire paradigm. It shatters the myth of the placeholder prophet.
And that brings us to the actual text we're analyzing with you today. We are diving into a specific lecture from the Toliwi Islam digital audio series.
Lecture 414 specifically.
Yeah, delivered by the mid-20th century scholar Ghulam Ahmad Parwez. He focuses intensely on verses 36 through 52 of Surah Ta-Ha. And to be clear with you right up front, this is not a religious fairy tale.
Not at all.
Parwez treats this text as an intellectually electric masterclass in political strategy. He frames Moses and his brother Aaron not as terrified, passive, holy men trembling before a massive throne, but as highly trained ideological strategists.
And that reframing is essential. Parwez looks at the text and argues that the confrontation in Pharaoh's court was the ultimate ideological showdown. This was an intricately calculated, rational deconstruction of an entrenched, oppressive political establishment.
He strips away all that mythological fluff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He examines the raw mechanics of power, oppression, and liberation.
But before we get into the actual mechanics of that takedown, let's just pause for a quick bit of housekeeping regarding the historical context.
Yeah, that's crucial here.
Because Parwez was delivering these lectures during a highly volatile time in the mid-20th century, and when you listen to him, he uses incredibly heavy, politically charged analogies from his era.
Right, he talks about the legacy of the British Empire, the bloody partition of India, the dynamics between Hindus and Muslims,
the creation of Pakistan, and the geopolitical establishment of Israel.
Which requires us to state our own rules of engagement clearly for this deep dive. We are examining these geopolitical references purely as historical artifacts, to understand his structural arguments.
We are completely impartial here.
100%. We aren't endorsing, validating, or condemning any of his 20th century political stances. Our focus is entirely on the mechanics of his argument. We want to understand how he uses these real-world examples to illustrate his broader thesis about how civilizations operate and the mathematical certainty of their eventual collapse.
So we're basically looking under the hood of his philosophy. And the engine of that philosophy starts in a place that completely shatters our modern concept of prayer.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's look at the launch point of this mission, Ayat 36. Moses has just been given this monumental, seemingly impossible task. Go to Pharaoh, the man who wants you dead, and demand the liberation of your people.
And Moses responds with a profound prayer.
Right. He asked for psychological expansion, for his task to be made easier, for eloquence in his speech, and for his brother Aaron to be deputized as his partner. And the divine response in Ayat 36 is immediate. It says, "You have been granted your request, O Moses."
Which is unfortunately where the traditional passive interpretation usually stops. The common reading is that, well, God granted the prayer, which means the heavy lifting is done.
Like God just handed Moses the victory.
Exactly. Now Moses just has to show up and watch the miracles happen.
Yeah.
But Parwez looks at this interpretation and essentially calls it an intellectual poison.
Because it creates this fatalistic worldview. Parwez is brutal on this point. He argues that when God said, "Your request is granted," he was not saying, "I've built the house for you."
No, not at all.
He was saying, "I have given you the psychological fortitude, I've given you the partner in your brother, I have given you the undeniable logic, I've given you the tools and the blueprint."
Right. Now you have to pick up the hammer, walk into the geopolitical arena, and build the house yourself.
The divine response is an authorization of action. It is never a replacement for human effort.
And the contrast Parwez draws here is stark. He offers a blistering critique of what he observes as the modern prayer-only mindset.
Yeah, he points directly to the annual Hajj pilgrimage.
He does. He describes how, year after year, millions of Muslims gather on the plains of Arafat. They stand there for decades, weeping, raising their hands, begging for divine intervention to solve their massive geopolitical and systemic crises.
And he points out the sheer tragedy of millions of people believing that if they just cry hard enough, God will magically alter global politics on their behalf.
Right, without them having to build strong institutions, economies, or strategic alliances.
And he doesn't just leave it at a critique of the pilgrims. He contrasts that passive weeping with the hyperactive strategies of geopolitical adversaries.
This is where he brings in the establishment of the State of Israel.
Right. And again, just to report his framing completely impartially here, he literally describes this establishment as an expanding cancer in the heart of the region. But his focus isn't just on condemning it, right?
No, his focus is on the mechanics of how it was achieved. He argues that while millions of people in his own community are passively praying for decades for this geopolitical issue to just vanish, the adversaries operating in the real world.
They are actively achieving their goals.
Exactly. Through concrete, systemic, action-building technological infrastructure, executing complex diplomacy, and deploying calculated military strategy.
So his overarching point is really about agency. When a marginalized group relies entirely on divine intervention to fix their systemic issues, they are effectively forfeiting their agency.
They hand their power right back to the oppressor.
Right. If you truly believe your liberation is waiting on a supernatural event, you are essentially signaling to the tyrant, take your time. We aren't going to organize. We aren't going to devise any political strategies because we are waiting for the sky to open up.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the way some people treat prayer like a cheat code in a video game. You know, you type in a code and it automatically skips the boss fight and suddenly you're at the end credits.
That's exactly how people treat it.
But Parwez is saying, no, granting the prayer is just unlocking the master level inventory. You finally have the ultimate shield, the right sword, and the map. But if you just sit your character in the corner of the map, pressing the pray button over and over, the boss is still going to walk over and crush you. You have to actively execute the mechanics of the game.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. Because the game mechanics in this context are the physical and social laws of the universe. Parwez emphasizes that the text repeatedly commands believers to stand firm, to seek knowledge, and to actively implement their strategies in the physical world.
It's an active process.
Right. God is telling Moses and Aaron, go with my signs and do not slacken in my remembrance. This directive to not slacken is a profound acknowledgement of human psychology, because when you are handed a massive task like, overthrowing an empire, the initial adrenaline rush can easily give way to fatigue when you hit the first bureaucratic or military roadblock.
Staying focused requires stamina, not just initial enthusiasm, which naturally makes you wonder, if Moses' prayer merely unlocked the tools, where did he learn how to swing the sword?
Right. Good question.
Because you don't just hand a guy a master-level inventory and push him into the final boss arena if he's never been in a fight. You need an origin story that explains his skill set. And the source text provides one, but it is entirely stripped of the usual magical realism.
Completely stripped of it.
Moses wasn't just a random shepherd who got zapped with a prophetic download. The text outlines a brutal, decades-long, systematic training program.
And this is perhaps Parwez's most compelling analytical sequence. He dismantles the concept of a magical prophet and replaces it with the concept of a deeply forged operative. To understand how Moses was forged, we have to do a deep dive into the Arabic linguistics of the text.
Specifically, Ayats 37 through 41.
Yes, and even more specifically, a wildly misunderstood word, wahi.
Oh, I'm glad we are tackling this. Because wahi is almost universally translated as revelation. If you ask anyone on the street, the image that comes to mind is an angel floating down from the clouds, handing a glowing scroll to a prophet.
Very supernatural.
Entirely supernatural.
But Parwez looks at the etymological root of the word wahaya and points out that its foundational linguistic meaning is actually a swift, secretive signal.
A swift, secretive signal.
Yeah, it is an innate intuition, a hidden directive that bypasses the conscious, slow, deliberative processes of the human mind. It is not necessarily a booming voice from the heavens or a physical angelic visitation.
He uses an amazing example from another part of the Quran to prove this point, talking about the bee.
Yes.
The text says that God sent Wahi to the bee to build its hive in the mountains and trees. Now, obviously, an angel didn't drop out of the sky with a tiny book for a bee.
Right, that would be absurd.
The Wahi here is the embedding of a systemic, instinctive program into the biology of the insect. The bee instinctively knows how to extract nectar, how to build perfectly hexagonal wax cells, and how to operate within a complex hive society. That innate, undeniable biological imperative is the Wahi.
So if you apply that linguistic reality to the story of Moses' birth, the text says God sent Wahi to Moses' mother, instructing her to put her infant in a basket and cast him into the river.
To save him from Pharaoh's death squads.
Exactly. This wasn't a magical voice. It was a profound, undeniable, intuitive signal cased directly into her heart. It was a psychological imperative that overrode normal maternal logic. I mean, logic says, keep your baby close.
Right, hold on to him.
But the Wahi, that swift, secretive intuition, said the only way to save him is to let him go.
And her execution of that intuitive signal sets up what might be, honestly, the most brilliant, ironic geopolitical infiltration in recorded history.
Oh, it's incredible.
Think about the audacity of this strategy. If you want to overthrow the ultimate tyrant, you don't raise the rebel leader in a hidden cave in the mountains. If you do that, the rebel only ever sees the outside of the fortress walls.
They don't know how the system works.
Exactly. Instead, the strategy was to have Pharaoh himself raise the destroyer of his own empire right in his own lap.
It's an infiltration at the highest conceivable level. Moses grew up walking the halls of power. He ate at the tables with the ministers of state, the military generals, the chief economists, and the high priests.
He was educated in what the text calls pharaonic wisdom.
Yeah, he understood the bureaucracy. He understood how the elite manipulated the masses, what their internal fears were, and exactly where the structural weaknesses of the empire lay.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second here. If Moses grew up with all that luxury, eating the best food, receiving the best education, why wouldn't he just become one of them? Like, why wouldn't the system just absorb him like it absorbs most elites?
That's the danger, right?
Right.
But it didn't happen because of the psychological foundation that was maintained. Despite being in the palace, he was fully aware of his Israelite heritage. He was an outsider on the inside.
Oh, okay.
He possessed the systemic knowledge of the oppressor, but he lacked the entitlement. However, Parwez points out that theoretical knowledge of statecraft isn't enough to make a liberator.
You need something more.
You have to experience the raw, physical reality of the oppression. And this leads to what Parwez calls the furnace of Moses' preparation.
The furnace. This is where the story gets really gritty. Moses is a young man walking in the city, and he witnesses an Egyptian guard brutally beating an Israelite slave. And Moses' innate reflex, the core character trait that makes him who he is that he literally cannot stand by and watch systemic violence.
It triggers him.
He intervenes, he strikes the oppressor, and the Egyptian dies.
And Parwez is meticulous in analyzing this incident. Moses did not intend to commit murder. It was a protective strike that was fatally miscalculated in the heat of the moment. But the psychological fallout is massive.
Overnight, his life is ruined.
In an instant, Moses goes from being a prince of Egypt, enjoying the protection of the elite, to a wanted criminal. He is forced to flee for his life across the harsh desert, ending up as a destitute refugee in the land of Midian.
This transition is so crucial for you to grasp. Imagine the identity crisis. Yesterday you were royalty. Today you are a terrified, exhausted fugitive sitting under a tree in the middle of nowhere.
It breaks a person.
But even here, at his absolute lowest point, the furnace is still burning. He is resting near a water well, and he observes an injustice. A group of strong, aggressive shepherds is monopolizing the water resource, physically pushing away two young women who are trying to water their flocks.
Notice the pattern here. It's a microcosm of the macro injustice in Egypt. In Egypt, Pharaoh monopolizes the Nile and the wealth, pushing away the Israelites. In Midian, the strong shepherds monopolize the well, pushing away the vulnerable women.
And Moses, a man with a bounty on his head? A man who should logically just keep his head down and avoid drawing attention to himself, he gets up.
He can't help it.
He walks over, confronts the shepherds, and secures the women's right to the water. His reflex to defend the oppressed completely overrides his instinct for self-preservation.
Exactly.
But here's my question for you, and for anyone listening who struggles with these narratives. If God is all-powerful, why put Moses through decades of this? Why the trauma of exile? Why the agonizing identity crisis?
It seems cruel.
Right. Why not just zap him with a perfect leadership update? It seems like an incredibly inefficient, painful way to build a leader.
And that question cuts to the absolute core of Parwez's philosophy. The answer is that God operates through the physical and social laws of the universe, not in violation of them. Character, resilience, and true empathy, they cannot be zapped into a human brain.
They have to be earned.
They must be forged through lived experience. Think about it. If Moses had only known the palace, he would have been an out-of-touch aristocrat. The enslaved Israelites would never have trusted a man who had never felt hunger or fear.
That makes sense.
Conversely, if he had only known the slave camps, he might have been driven purely by blind, traumatized rage, lacking the strategic sophistication needed to actually outmaneuver Pharaoh's political machine.
Oh, wow. So it's the synthesis of the two extremes. He needed the strategic, systemic knowledge of the elite, combined with the grounded, desperate empathy of the oppressed.
Precisely. And the text actually validates this long, painful process.
Yeah.
God tells Moses, "We tried you with a heavy trial. Then you came here according to a precise measure."
A precise measure.
That phrase is breathtaking.
Yeah.
It implies that Moses was subjected to the exact mathematical calibrations of hardship, elite education, physical danger, and psychological pressure required to mold him into the exact instrument needed for this specific historical moment.
The universe didn't just stumble upon Moses, it forged him.
Yes, and only after this decades-long crucible does God say, "I have chosen you for myself."
Okay, so the operative is fully forged, the tools are unlocked, he understands the empire from the inside out, he has the empathy of a refugee, and his character has been tested in the furnace.
He's ready.
Now, the mission goes live. Moses and Aaron are ordered to march back into the capital, walk up to the palace, and initiate the ultimate ideological showdown. And this brings us to the tactical briefing they receive in Ayat 44, which, frankly, sounds incredibly counterintuitive at first glance.
It really does.
God commands them to speak to Pharaoh using Qualan Laina.
Qualan Laina. Traditionally, this is translated simply as gentle speech or soft words.
Right, and if you're listening to this, put yourself in Moses' shoes. You're walking in to confront a megalomaniacal tyrant who slaughters infants, runs a brutal slave state, and literally wants to execute you. And your tactical instruction is to use gentle speech.
Yeah, it sounds absurd.
It sounds like you're being told to go in and speak in hushed, soothing, submissive tones to a dictator.
And that is exactly where the traditional reading falls completely flat.
Hmm.
Parwez argues forcefully that Qualan Laina does not mean submissive, flattering, or weak speech.
No, at all.
In the context of a high-stakes ideological confrontation in a royal court, it means speech that is gentle in the sense of being perfectly smooth, precise, logical, and evidence-based.
Smooth like a blade.
Exactly. It means rhetoric that is entirely stripped of emotional hysteria. The command is essentially, do not lose your temper, do not scream, do not hurl petty insults, present a mathematically tight, irrefutable argument.
Because if you walk in screaming and throwing a tantrum, the tyrant wins instantly.
Without a doubt. I mean, if Moses storms into the throne room, raving, yelling curses, and frothing at the mouth, Pharaoh doesn't even have to debate him. He just leans back on his throne, looks at his ministers, and says, "Gentlemen, look at this lunatic. He's clearly lost his mind in the desert. Guards, take him away to the asylum."
Pharaoh wins the PR battle in 10 seconds.
He looks like the calm, reasonable statesman putting down a madman.
But if Moses walks in with terrifyingly calm, razor-sharp logic, that's a completely different threat.
It changes everything.
It's like, imagine you are trying to destroy a heavily armored military tank. If you run up to it screaming and throwing rocks at the armor, the tank driver is just going to laugh at you. You look ridiculous, and the rocks do absolutely nothing.
Right.
But imagine if you calmly walk right up to the tank, completely ignoring the massive guns, and you pull out a wrench. And with absolute precision, you calmly unscrew the one specific bolt that holds the entire engine block together. The driver isn't laughing anymore.
No, he's panicking.
He's terrified because you understand the mechanical vulnerability of his machine better than he does.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize Qualan Laina.
Yeah.
You are dismantling the machine using its own mechanical logic.
Okay.
Parwez points out that God says, "Speak to him with gentle speech that perhaps he may be reminded or fear."
The fear comes from the logic.
Exactly. The objective isn't just to provoke a reaction. The objective is to present an argument so tight, so objectively grounded in reality, that the oppressor is forced to confront the intellectual illegitimacy of his own power. It is an intellectual siege.
So Moses and Aaron execute the strategy. They walk into the palace. And remember, Moses used to live here. He knows the protocol. He knows the guards.
He's comfortable there.
He doesn't act like a terrified peasant.
Yeah.
He carries himself like a peer who has returned with the truth. They stand before the throne and lay out their primary political demand. We are messengers from your Lord. Let the children of Israel go with us, and do not torment them.
It is a direct demand to dismantle the slave labor force that underpins the entire Egyptian economy.
And Pharaoh's immediate reaction is a masterclass in power dynamics. He doesn't panic. He attempts to instantly reassert his dominance by putting Moses in his place with a seemingly simple, almost dismissive question in Ayat 49.
Yeah, this is a pivotal moment.
Pharaoh leans forward and asks, "So who is the Lord of you two, O Moses?"
And we have to understand the immense geopolitical weight of this question. In the Egyptian societal structure, Pharaoh wasn't just a king or an administrator. He claimed the absolute title of Rab,
Ra.
which translates to the ultimate lord, sustainer, and provider.
He literally owned everything. He owned the land, the crops, the water of the Nile, and the bodies of the people.
Exactly. So by asking, who is your lord? Yeah, Pharaoh is laying down a challenge. He is saying, I am the sole provider of this nation. I control the economy. I control the food supply. Who is this alternative authority you claim to represent? What economic base does your so-called lord possess?
Which sets the stage for Moses to drop the wrench into the engine. We're looking at Ayat 50, and this is where the linguistic deep dive gets incredibly radical.
It's mind-blowing.
Pharaoh asks, "Who is your Lord?" And Moses responds, "Our Lord is he who gave everything its creation, then guided it." Now, if you read that in a standard translation, it just sounds like generic religious praise. God made the trees, God made the sky, praise God.
Right, Sunday school stuff.
But Parwez exposes this as a hyper-radical, socio-political statement that strikes at the jugular of Pharaoh's empire.
It is arguably one of the most subversive statements in the history of political thought. Let's dissect the word Rab, as Parwez does. It does not merely mean a deity sitting on a cloud waiting to be worshipped.
No.
Rab, from the root rababa, means the sustainer. It is the entity that nourishes, develops, and provides the exact necessary environment and resources for a creation to reach its full intended potential.
And Pharaoh's entire system is built on a grotesque parody of that concept. Pharaoh claims to be the Rab by hoarding all the resources of the Nile and then artificially rationing them out.
That is the core of imperialism. Parwez draws a direct parallel here to the British Empire's colonization of India, a reality he lived through and witnessed.
Oh, wow.
The British Empire would extract the raw wealth of the subcontinent, the cotton, the agricultural output, often creating devastating artificial famines in the process. Then they would turn around and tell the colonized population, look at the railways we built for you. Look at the administrative order we provide. We are civilizing you. We are your sustainers.
So they claimed the role of the Rab while operating as the ultimate parasite.
Yes. Pharaoh was doing the exact same thing with the Egyptian agrarian economy.
He creates artificial scarcity to force dependency. He's saying, I give you your daily bread, therefore you must worship me.
So when Moses defines the true Rab as the one who gave everything its creation, then guided it, he is introducing a completely different, mathematically sound paradigm. He is pointing to the universal natural law of sustenance.
And Parwez uses an incredibly vivid illustration from the source material to drive this home, doesn't he?
He does. He asks the audience to consider the phenomenon of the bird building a nest.
Yes, the bird nest analogy. If you're listening, really think about the mechanics of this because it blew my mind.
Parwez observes a small bird. When the season changes, long before any eggs are laid, the bird instinctively begins to gather twigs, grass, and mud. It works tirelessly, flying back and forth hundreds of times, weaving these materials together to build an incredibly complex, structurally sound, thermally insulated nest.
Right.
Now think about this. The bird didn't go to an engineering school to learn thermodynamics. It doesn't demand a wage for its labor. It doesn't even consciously know why it is building the nest, because the offspring don't even exist yet. Yet it prepares the perfect environment for the next generation.
And once the chicks hatch, the parent birds fly themselves into exhaustion, finding insects, starving themselves to feed their young, driven by this overwhelming, undeniable biological imperative.
Why does the bird do this? Parwez says this is the ultimate manifestation of Hidayah, divine guidance, embedded into the very nature of creation. The true Rab doesn't just physically create the bird. He embeds within the bird the instinctive knowledge of how to survive and thrive.
The operating system is pre-installed.
Exactly. Furthermore, the universe provides the twigs, the mud, the insects, the atmosphere, all the resources the bird needs freely and abundantly. The true Rab demands no payment, no slave labor, and no taxes in return for this universal sustenance.
So, by defining Rab in these terms, Moses is committing high treason right to Pharaoh's face.
Yes, he is.
He is effectively saying, look at the natural world, Pharaoh. Look at the birds, the rivers, the crops. The universe operates on a baseline system of universal free sustenance provided by the Creator. You have violently hijacked this system.
You don't own it.
Right. You don't actually sustain these people. The earth does. Your elite monopoly is a violation of the foundational laws of nature. You are nothing but an artificial bottleneck on God's free provision.
It is a complete intellectual dismantling of the pharaonic economy. Moses is laying out a macroeconomic reality. Pharaoh's system creates artificial scarcity to maintain political power, whereas the divine system is based on universal abundance and instinctive guidance. By declaring this calmly and rationally in the throne room, Moses is delegitimizing Pharaoh's entire claim to authority in front of his own ministers.
And that is terrifying for a dictator. When the logic is that precise, that qualam layina, you can't just shout it down. You can imagine the tension in the room. The ministers are listening. The military generals are listening. And a dangerous thought starts creeping into their minds. Wait, the Nile provides the water naturally? The earth grows the grain naturally? The slaves do the labor? What exactly does Pharaoh actually do other than hoard it all and claim he's a god?
It's a systemic awakening happening in real time.
Right.
And Pharaoh, being a master politician, realizes instantly that he is losing the intellectual argument. His economic theology has just been exposed as a massive parasitic fraud.
The tank bolt has been unscrewed.
The bolt is out and the engine is rattling. So what does a cornered politician do when they are losing a debate based on objective facts and systemic logic?
They deflect. They throw up a smokescreen. Which brings us to the brilliant rhetorical trap in Ayat 51, the engine of reason versus the tyranny of unproven assertions. Pharaoh realizes his credibility is bleeding out on the floor, so he violently pivots the conversation. He leans forward and asks Moses, well, what about the past generations?
It is a textbook deflection tactic, and it is incredibly dangerous. Pharaoh shifts the goalposts entirely. He realizes he cannot win a debate about universal sustenance, artificial scarcity, and his current systemic oppression. So he abandons the economic debate and moves into the realm of historical anomalies and pure emotional manipulation.
If you're listening right now, think about how often you see this exact same tactic used in modern political or corporate debates. It's the sleaziest trick in the book.
Oh, we see it every day.
Pharaoh is basically inciting his courtiers. He's looking around the room, making eye contact with his ministers and saying, listen to this radical. If Moses is right and his Lord is the only true provider, then what does that mean for your beloved ancestors? What about your grandfathers and great-grandfathers who worshiped the gods of Egypt and built this empire? Are you saying they were fools? Are you saying they are all burning in hell?
The emotional weight of that accusation is massive. Parwez explicitly connects this to the sectarian and political debates of his own time, particularly in the Indian subcontinent. He notes how often, when reformers try to address current, rotting systemic issues like economic inequality or corruption, the defenders of the status quo will immediately start throwing accusations of heresy.
Right. They drag revered historical figures or ancestors into the mud to avoid dealing with the present reality.
They will scream, if you are claiming our current system is corrupt, you are insulting the founding fathers who built it. You are disrespecting the martyrs.
I'm picturing a modern analogy for this. It's like an investigative journalist cornering the CEO of a massive chemical company about the fact that his factories are currently dumping toxic waste into the local drinking water.
A very real scenario.
The CEO knows he's caught. The data is undeniable. So instead of addressing the toxic waste, the CEO points a finger and says, well, the founder of this company was a beloved philanthropist who built the local hospital. Are you saying he was a bad person? Are you attacking his legacy?
It's a complete emotional bait and switch.
It has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that there is currently poison in the water, but suddenly everyone in the room is arguing about the founder's legacy.
It is the tyranny of unproven assertions. Pharaoh is using the deep, emotional, cultural attachment the Egyptians have to their ancestors as a human shield to protect his own current tyranny. And it is the perfect political trap. Parwez highlights the sheer psychological danger of this exact moment in the narrative.
Right, because Moses is caught between a rock and a hard place. If Moses takes the bait and acts like a rigid theologian saying, yes, your ancestors were pagans, they were wrong, and they are all burning in hell, the crowd will instantly turn on him.
The emotional outrage will override their logical awakening, and they will tear him apart for insulting their heritage.
But if Moses tries to be diplomatic and validates them, saying, oh, I'm sure your ancestors were fine people, his entire theological and logical argument crumbles.
And Pharaoh exposes him as a hypocrite who bends his principles to please the crowd.
So how does he get out of it? This is where the long preparation in the furnace truly pays off. Moses refuses to play Pharaoh's game. He doesn't take the bait, and he doesn't compromise. He executes a flawless rhetorical sidestep in Ayat 52, which introduces us to the concept of social physics and the law of requital.
Social physics.
Yes. Moses looks at Pharaoh and delivers a cold, objectively true answer. He says, the knowledge of them is with my Lord in a record. My Lord neither errs nor forgets.
It is an absolute verbal judo flip.
It really is. Moses is essentially saying, I am not here to debate the theological status of dead people, Pharaoh. That is above my pay grade. It is known only to God. And frankly, it is completely irrelevant to the political demand I just placed on your desk. I'm here for the living slaves, not a history seminar on your grandfather.
Precisely. But Parwez extracts a much deeper philosophical framework from this response. When Moses says, the knowledge of them is in a record and my Lord never errs, he's not just talking about a mystical book in heaven.
Right.
Parwez argues he is talking about the objective, unalterable ledger of human history. History is not a random, chaotic sequence of events. It is a closed loop of cause and effect, governed by physical and social laws. In Parwez's terminology, this is Mukafadi Amal, the law of requital.
This is a foundational concept we really need to unpack. The law of requital. It sounds like a principle of physics applied to sociology.
That's exactly what it is, social physics. The law of requital dictates that every action, every policy, every systemic choice a society makes generates an inevitable consequence. The universe is keeping an objective mathematical score.
So if an empire is built on the foundation of slave labor, the systemic extraction of wealth from the poor, and the hoarding of resources by a tiny elite,
It leaves a massive, unalterable deficit in the historical ledger.
it's like building a massive skyscraper, but you decide to use cheap, rusted steel for the foundation just to save money.
Yes. You might get away with it for a year. The building might look glorious for a generation, maybe even two. The architect might be praised as a genius. But the laws of physics, gravity, load-bearing stress, metallurgy, they cannot be cheated.
The universe does not forget the rusted steel.
Eventually, the math catches up, the structural deficit balances itself out, and the skyscraper violently collapses.
So Moses is basically telling Pharaoh, math is math, and your societal math doesn't add up. He's saying, I don't need to hurl insults at your ancestors to win this argument. The historical record shows that their system, the exact system of extraction and oppression that you inherited and are currently running, is fundamentally unsustainable.
It violates the natural laws of justice and universal sustenance.
The collapse of your empire isn't just a theological curse. It is already mathematically written in the ledger of social physics.
That is the brilliance of his response. He completely neutralizes the emotional deflection and refocuses the entire debate back onto the objective reality of Pharaoh's current crimes. He tells the dictator that trying to hide behind the graves of revered ancestors will not save his empire from the mathematical certainty of its own collapse.
The universe doesn't forget systemic injustice.
No, it records it in the rot and fragility of the society, and eventually the bill always comes due.
Wow. When you lay it out like that, it's just staggering. It's a completely different way of engaging with the text. It's not a magic spell. It's a deeply rational, socio-political checkmate.
It really is.
And it makes you realize just how necessary that decades-long preparation in the furnace was. Only someone who possessed the elite systemic training of the palace, combined with the hardened resilience and empathy of a fugitive, could stand in front of the most powerful man on earth, dodge his emotional traps, and calmly deconstruct his macroeconomic system without blinking.
It forces us to elevate our understanding of these narratives. They aren't placeholders for magical thinking. They are blueprints for how to confront and dismantle oppressive power structures using intellect, resilience, and an unshakable grasp of objective reality.
And it leaves us with such a profound takeaway for our own lives. I mean, think about Pharaoh's deflection strategy. What about the past generations and how completely it failed to break Moses' rational focus? I want to challenge you, the listener, to look at the world around you right now.
Just turn on the news.
Look at political debates, corporate town halls, or even arguments on social media. How often do we see this exact same tactic deployed? How often do we let emotional deflections, cultural wedge issues, or manufactured outrage about the past pull us away from demanding systemic justice and accountability in the present? We get so easily distracted by the shiny object the tank driver points at that we forget we are holding the wrench. We forget to unscrew the bolt. Moses didn't forget. He kept his eyes on the engine.
Pharaoh realizes he can't win the intellectual argument. His back is against the wall, so he turns to his favorite weapon, state-sponsored propaganda and illusion. In Lecture 514, covering Ayat 5360, we are going to watch Pharaoh call in his elite sorcerers to stage a massive public trial. The stage is set for a total ideological showdown, and we'll see exactly how empirical reality shatters political stagecraft. See you next time.